I've been waiting for a while to discuss this article online, Democracy or Plutocracy, America's Existential Question. This is by Kishore Mahbubani, a distinguished fellow at the Asia Research Institute of the National University of Singapore. This essay contains excerpts from his latest book, Has China Won? 2020. You may follow him on Twitter. Before we dive into that, I want you to know that Minneapolis police have recently shot and killed a man during a traffic stop. At first, there were about 36 people gathered outside police tape at Holiday Station on 36th and Cedar, where police shot and killed a man after a traffic stop tonight. It's very cold, 20 degrees, and people breaking out hand warmers. More people appear to be arriving. Then there were about 100 people. They were coordinating to block off traffic with vehicles at 36th Street. Sound system with beats. It's important to note that the site of this fatal shooting by police is 0.8 miles from 38th and Chicago, where George Floyd was killed. The crowd took down police tape on 36th and are near cops on the side driveway of the gas station. Cops are taping that off. That's such an interesting symbol when they use police tape to try to tell people where they're not supposed to go. I remember being on strike a few years ago. It was the state system faculty union, and we were told where we could stand on the sidewalk and where we couldn't. Let me tell you, some of my fellow professors were really mad at me when I tried to stand where I wasn't supposed to. But I digress. You can fill in the details on this story. It's still emerging. They don't want us to know what's going on, but we'll find out eventually. And then we can share it with each other on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. Next, I want to jump back to Keaton Weiss, who had a response for the show that we had about his article a couple days ago. Keaton made the point that the Democratic Party is the problem, not AOC or Jimmy Dore. One of the points I made in the commentary is that it's not okay to cover for our so-called progressives in Congress. I think we've about worn out the analogy of pink slime, but I said that we get slimy when we try to make excuses for our so-called progressives in Congress. Keaton made this comment underneath the YouTube video. The problem with your argument, Alan, is that if you support force the vote, you are committing to a solution which depends on the Democratic Party. If you're as done with the Democratic Party as you claim to be, then why be invested in this force the vote plan at all? And yes, dear viewers and listeners, there is a very good answer to that question. I can hear some of you shouting right now. This is framing. It's tricky and disingenuous. Why give a damn one way or the other if Pelosi becomes speaker again? I don't. I already know we're going to lose no matter who's speaker. That's not the point. That kind of question is designed to get us to take our eye off the ball and get bogged down in some other detail. More distraction follows. Why pin any hopes on any Democratic congresspeople doing the right thing? It makes no sense to say that on the one hand, no progressive solutions can come from within the party, but on the other hand, get overly invested in this force the vote strategy. That's all well and good if that's what we're trying to do, but that's not what we're trying to do. Let me jump down to my response, and then I'll come back to the rest of Keaton's response. The point to make, even within your framing, is that we need to reveal the libs and progs in their true sliminess. I'm invested, passionately, if that's okay with you, in showing everyone who has been sucked into duopolistic thinking to wake up and see what's going on. And then, dear viewers and listeners, I used the analogy of C.S. Lewis, his book, The Silver Chair. There's an evil enchantress called the Green Lady who returns and tries to bewitch them all into forgetting who they are, they being the protagonists of the story. You really should go read this if you haven't yet. Only one of the characters in the story is able to keep his senses. He burns his foot in the process, and only he is able to call a spade, and he calls out the evil enchantress. By doing this, he wakes the others up to see what's actually happening. I tell Keaton, I want to serve in the role of Puddleglum. We need an honest marshwiggle to show the mainstream media swilling shitlibs, including Bernie supporters, just how impossible it will ever be to get our so-called progressives to do anything that achieves more than mere posturing and further sheepdogging. The point of Force the Vote is to show us all, including me, the spell we've been enchanted with. So no, we don't believe the vote will pass. The vote won't even change the hearts and minds of our congresspeople. What it will do is expose them. Keaton goes on to say, When I say the party is the pink slime, I mean that anyone who engages it in any way whatsoever will inevitably get some of that slime on them, even if you're, as you are, trying to force it to bend to your will, in this case by pressuring the squad and other progressives to force the vote. I'm not. You're mischaracterizing me again. I'm not trying to force them to do anything. I'm trying to help people in the United States and around the world to see what a bunch of frauds they are. Then we get out in the streets, then we take down the police tape, then we run roughshod over the powers that are in front of us. We get out our guillotines and pitchforks, and we do this. I don't know if you're intentionally missing my point, if you're just trying to make a point that you can better argue against. He then says that I don't fully understand his literary reference, or maybe I don't. Maybe you gotta watch Ghostbusters 2 to better understand the reference, but getting the slime on you doesn't mean it makes you corrupt or evil. It just means you become overcome with these negative emotions, which you obviously are on this issue. I don't blame you. I would be too if I were as invested in this force the vote plan as you are. It almost is like he's trying to make it a bad thing to be passionate. Why is this so threatening? Why do we want to defend AOC and Bernie to this extent when they're standing right in between us and what we need? Controlled opposition does a lot more harm than what we're supposedly opposing. What does it say about a political pundit if you're standing in between us and criticizing these controlled opposition sheepdogs? And then he concludes with, but that's exactly my point. When you invest at all in any solution that involves this party or any of its functionaries, you're bound to end up angry and jaded because when you involve yourself with this party at all, you're inevitably going to get slimed. I just want to know, Keaton, why you're so opposed to us criticizing them. I don't know why we're afraid of getting angry or jaded, or even nihilistic. I think those are necessary steps along the path. I just have a really hard time seeing why anyone would defend people who are standing in between us and what we need. We need not only to reveal our so-called progressives in Congress, we need to reveal our lefty pundits. We need everyone to fully commit. We need to take sides. We need to hold everyone to account. And now to Kishore Mahbubani's excellent article. Is the United States of America still a functioning democracy, or has it become, for all practical purposes, a plutocracy? And why is this question important? It's important because the answer to the question of whether America has a dark or shining future will depend on whether it's a democracy or plutocracy. Indeed, this question may well be the most existential question America has to address. Let's begin to answer this question from the very beginning. What is the actual difference between a democracy and a plutocracy? In a democracy, the masses broadly determine their future. Equally critically, in terms of the economy, society, and political system, there is a level playing field where the working classes, middle classes, and affluent elites compete. The term level playing field is absolutely critical here. Many Americans believe that their economic and political systems create a level playing field in which the poor and disadvantaged can rise to the top. This is also why there is no social resentment of billionaires in America. Most Americans believe that they have an equal opportunity to become billionaires, so the first big question we need to address is this: is there a level playing field for the poor and rich? Here is Joseph Kepler's famous 1889 cartoon illustrating plutocracy. Joseph calls the guys in the back the monopolists, and the monopolists are still with us today. They have their own entrance, and they're all standing back there presiding over what's going on. The point is that the mere mortals sitting in front of them don't have a chance. The honest answer is no. Today, when working class or even middle class Americans have to compete with the affluent elites, they are not competing on a level playing field. They have to run uphill to score goals. By contrast, the affluent elites run downhill as the playing field is tilted in their favor. Writing in the Financial Times in June 2019, Edward Luce provides one statistic to drive home this point. Studies show that an 8th grade, i.e. a 14-year-old child from a lower income bracket who achieves maths results in the top quarter is less likely to graduate than a kid in the upper income bracket scored in the bottom quarter. This is the reverse of how meritocracy should work. The talented kid from a lower income bracket can't compete with the less talented kid from an upper income bracket. Think George W. Bush at Harvard. There is no shortage of data to drive home the point that there is no longer a level playing field in America. Anand Giridharadas, a former New York Times columnist, has documented in great detail in his book, Winners Take All, 2018, how the dream of the American middle class has effectively evaporated. As he says, a successful society is a progress machine. It takes in the raw material or innovations and produces broad human advancement. America's machine is broken. When the fruits of change have fallen on the United States in recent decades, the very fortunate have basketed almost all of them. For instance, the average pre-tax income of the top tenth of Americans has doubled since 1980, that of the top 1% has more than tripled, and that of the top 0.001% has risen more than sevenfold, even as the average pre-tax income of the bottom half of Americans has stayed almost precisely the same. These familiar figures amount to 3.5 decades worth of wondrous head-spinning change with zero impact on the average pay of 117 million Americans. Giridharadas claims that the American people are beginning to feel that the system is unfair. Thus, many millions of Americans on the left and right feel one thing in common, that the game is rigged against people like them. There is a spreading recognition on both sides of the ideological divide that the system is broken, that the system has to change. Giridharadas is right. To create a level playing field, the system has to change. But it will not change. Why not? What are the obstacles to change? And if there are obstacles, why hasn't the world's freest media, the American media, revealed these obstacles? This is where the story becomes complex. We also have to venture into politically controversial territory to understand the obstacles to change. The main obstacle to change is a myth. An example from history will help. For centuries, European serfs accepted a feudal system in which they were second-class citizens, if not slaves, in a system dominated by feudal lords. Why didn't the majority of serfs overthrow the minority of feudal lords? A huge myth was created to generate a belief that this system was just. The kind and gentle feudal lords reinforced the myth. At the risk of quoting a politically controversial philosophical concept, let me mention a term used for this phenomenon: false consciousness. According to Daniel Little, Chancellor Emeritus and Professor of Philosophy at University of Michigan Dearborn, false consciousness is a concept derived from Marxist theory of social class. Members of the subordinate class, workers, peasants, serfs, suffer from false consciousness in that their mental representations of the social relations around them systematically conceal or obscure the realities of subordination, exploitation, and domination those relations embody. Marx asserts that social mechanisms emerge in class society that systematically create distortions, errors, and blind spots in the consciousness of the underclass. If these consciousness-shaping mechanisms did not exist, then the underclass, always a majority, would quickly overthrow the system of their domination. To this, Caitlin Johnstone would reply, ding, ding, ding. Caitlin's narrative managers are the ones who do this to us. Yet, even if contemporary Americans were to accept that there was false consciousness in the feudal era, they would contest the possibility of it emerging in modern American society, where the unique combination of the world's freest and fiercely independent media, the best universities, the best funded think tanks, and the spirit of open and critical inquiry would expose any big myth that enveloped American society. Many Americans would assert no myths can survive in the robustly open environment of American society. Only facts survive. To be fair, many American writers have written about the several dimensions of plutocracy in American society. In addition to Giridharadas, who was cited earlier, distinguished American writers like Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz and Robert Reich have documented, for example, the growing inequality in America. In his brilliant May 2011 Vanity Fair article entitled "Of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%, Stiglitz opines that it's no use pretending that what has obviously happened has not in fact happened. The upper 1% of Americans are now taking in nearly a quarter of the nation's income every year. In terms of wealth rather than income, the top 1% control 40%. Their lot in life has improved considerably. 25 years ago, the corresponding figures were 12% and 33%. Yet what most of these articles emphasize is the growing inequality in America. And if the problem is inequality, then fortunately the problem can be solved. As America has the world's most robust democratic system, where the broad masses elect the leaders who in turn take care of the interests of the broad masses, any problem of inequality could eventually be fixed. In short, if America has a problem, it also has a solution. Democracy. No, it doesn't. Its solution is blood in the streets. But I'm jumping ahead here. Let's keep going. This brings us to the heart of the argument of this essay. To put it simply, the solution has become part of the problem. While all the democratic processes remain in place, with Americans going to the polls every 2 or 4 years, depending on the elected office, to select their leaders, who will in theory take care of them, the results of all those processes is that Americans elect leaders who will take care of the 1%, not of the 99%. How did this happen? How did America, which on the surface still functions as a democracy, become a plutocracy, which takes care of the interest of the 1%? Note, the term 1% is used metaphorically here. The real reference is to a tiny elite that benefits from a non-level playing field. There was one great American who anticipated the effective hijacking of the American democratic system by the very affluent. He is America's greatest political philosopher of recent times, John Rawls. Rawls warned that if those who have greater private means are permitted to use their advantages to control the course of public debate, this would be the corrupting result. Eventually, these inequalities will enable those better situated to exercise a larger influence over the development of legislation. In due time, they are likely to acquire a preponderant weight in settling social questions, at least in regard to those matters upon which they normally agree, which is to say, in regard to those things that support their favored circumstances. This is precisely what has happened over the past few decades. The affluent have gained preponderant weight, look at the picture behind my head, in regard of those things that support their favored circumstances. There has been a relative transfer of wealth and political power from the vast majority of America's population to a privileged super minority. The practical effect of transferring power to a super minority is that the political system responds to the needs and interests of the top 1%, not to the 99%. And then he goes on to list the studies that prove this fact. But I assume if you're watching this show, you already know this is a fact. The alarming conclusion, which I'm sure we all know, is that Americans do enjoy many features central to democratic governance, such as regular elections, freedom of speech and association, except when it comes to Google, Twitter, and Facebook algorithms, and a widespread, if still contested, franchise. But we believe that if policymaking is dominated by powerful business organizations and a small number of affluent Americans, then America's claims to being a democratic society are seriously threatened. Actually, they're bogus as fuck. Then he uses facts and figures and consortia and analyses to show us what we already know. He criticizes Citizens United, which we've done lots of times before. Martin Wolf says that the Supreme Court's perverse 2010 Citizens United decision held that companies are persons and money is speech. That has proved a big step on the journey of the U.S. towards becoming a plutocracy. Now, Martin Wolf is one of the most influential columnists in the world. He also describes himself as being fiercely pro-American. In a column written in 2018, Wolf said, "The U.S. was not just any great power, it embodied the causes of democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. This made my father fiercely pro-American. I inherited this attitude. America is an open society. Therefore, when major voices like Martin Wolf and Joseph Stiglitz describe America as having become a plutocracy, the logical result should have been a major public debate on whether this claim is true. Instead, the opposite happened. This comment by Martin Wolf was buried. The psychological resistance in America to use the term plutocracy is deep. Leading newspapers like the New York Times and Washington Post do not use it. Leading columnists like Richard Cohen and Paul Krugman do not use it, nor do distinguished historians like Simon Schama mention plutocracy. Certainly no American politician uses it. So what is in a name? Shakespeare once famously said, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." I sometimes doubt this piece of wisdom. If someone were to change the name of rose to skunk flower, we might approach a rose with some caution. Choosing the right name makes a huge difference. As the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." So it's obvious at this point that the way to break the vicious circle is by breaking the stranglehold that the media have on all of us. The media are the green enchantress. The media are the ones casting the incantations to keep us all confused and disoriented. They're there to put the police tape around us and make us think that we aren't able to cross that police tape. The sad reality about the US is that functionally there is absolutely no doubt that the political system has gone from functioning as a democracy, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Let me stop there for a second. Don't forget that our democracy was written by white slaveholders for their own benefit. But we'll leave that go for a minute and finish the sentence. Towards becoming a plutocracy, a government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. Yet, while this political reality is undeniable, it is also unspeakable. So that's why we're here, folks. We're here to speak the unspeakable. Skipping ahead, any American who has doubts about the dangers posed by plutocracy should pause and reflect on these figures. Let's repeat the figure. 45% of Americans have family members in jail or prison. 45%. These high levels of incarceration did not happen because the American people have psychological characteristics that make them more likely to become criminals. This is a result of the socioeconomic conditions of the bottom 50% that have steadily deteriorated. Ding, ding, ding! If it is manifestly obvious that the American political system is facing a crisis, why is there no consensus on the American body politic on what has gone wrong? Surely the best newspapers and universities and the best known students and professors in the world should be able to arrive at a clear consensus on the real problems faced by American society. That's why I'm embarrassed to say that I'm a university professor. I'm part of a huge scam, and I'm well aware of that fact. Skipping ahead, all this means that there are two possible outcomes. The first is a revolution against the establishment in Washington, D.C. Paradoxically, this may have been what the working classes thought they were doing when they elected Trump in 2016. They wanted to elect someone outside the establishment and one who would shake up the establishment. When Hillary Clinton responded in 2016 by calling Trump supporters a basket of deplorables, it showed that she, together with the rest of the Washington establishment, did not understand what the broad masses of Americans were trying to convey. Unfortunately, in electing Trump, the working classes voted in a plutocrat. In office, Trump acted like a plutocrat. He cut taxes for the rich again. The conditions for the bottom 50% didn't improve. The second possible outcome is for the arrival of enlightenment. At some point in time, the top 1% in America must come to realize that if they are going to protect most of their personal economic gain in America and not make an effort to improve the conditions of the bottom 50%, they will only damage the very body politic, American society, that is enabling them to become so wealthy. I hope, though, that you're not suggesting that we should leave them in power this time. I'm not willing for us again to make compromises with these monopolists. He goes on to say that it's fortunate many wealthy Americans are coming to realize this. The danger in saying that, though, is that you sound like Elizabeth Warren, who wants to compromise with the monopolists and make them do a little bit better by the American people. In other words, they need to participate in a more humane form of noblesse oblige, which we've talked about before. We don't need noblesse oblige, we need guillotines. So the article does begin to devolve into sounding a little bit like Elizabeth Warren and even Matt Stoller at this point. Let's see if we can rehabilitate capitalism and make it a kinder and gentler version. I have some good friends who feel this way, and I engage them in good faith arguments, trying to let them know, nope, it's not going to happen. If we leave these assholes in charge again, the next time we have to deal with them will be even worse than this time. So I hate to break it to you, Kishore, but I can't agree with your 5 hard steps forward because they sound a lot like what Matt Stoller or Elizabeth Warren would suggest. The first solution is ending Citizens United, which won't happen without a revolution. Second step would be to emulate the example of the fellow democracies in the European Union and impose strict limits on the amount of money that can be spent on elections. And again, that won't happen without a revolution. That won't happen without blood in the streets. The third step is to change American ideology in a fundamental way. We're trying to do that with this show. But you make a mistake if you say that we should go back to the wisdom of our founding fathers. The founding fathers were all slaveholders. They were all white aristocrats. They were all the 1%. It isn't only the fault of people from Ronald Reagan forward. The fourth step is to acknowledge that market forces alone cannot create a level playing field for all Americans. That's a central tenet of neoliberal thought that went on steroids when Maggie Thatcher and Ronnie Reagan came to power. It's difficult to teach people, though, that the market shouldn't be sovereign when we've been brainwashed for so long. And we've been brainwashed by the moguls and monopolists who own all of the media. I don't think we can break through on the front of universities and newspapers and other media outlets until we have a revolution. I think those powers have such a grip on us that they won't relinquish it until there is blood in the streets. When it comes to the neoliberal education system, especially higher education, guillotines may be the only answer there as well. And as an aside, I'll say that our shitty union, our shitty teachers union, won't be reformed through any other than revolutionary tactics. Fifthly, the American government should declare that the main goal of American society is to go from being number 28 on the Social Progress Index towards becoming number 1 on this index. Hence, instead of trying to become the number 1 military power and wasting trillions fighting unnecessary wars, America will spend its trillions improving the living conditions of Americans measured in the Social Progress Index. And again, that's not going to happen with the monopolists in charge. The bottom line he presents here is the bottom line, but it's one of 2 bottom lines. His bottom line is the solutions will only work if Americans agree on what the problem is, and the problem is quite simply plutocracy. But if we do break the information embargo and get them this word, the second bottom line is that we have to pile into the streets to get this done. These fat cat monopolists aren't going anywhere until we figure out how to force the issue. So Kishore is right that we need to educate people so that they know what's going on, and then we have to hope that the revolutionary spirit that got us our freedom in the first place is still extant. Let's all hope that the American people haven't become too weak and greedy to rise up and effect the change that the whole world needs right now.